series of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. We have the pleasure of having with us today Professor Ranjan Ghosh from IIM Ahmedabad. He is a professor in the Center for Management in Agriculture um, there, and he's going to speak to us on the subject, the protest that wasn't placing reforms within a 21st century agricultural vision. As we all know, this is an extremely important subject for us. In many parts of the world, including in India, agriculture uh, needs a variety of reforms. However, the fact is that whenever efforts are made to change certain things, established practices in agriculture, there are uh, there are protests and there is resistance from farmers and others. In the case of India, we know that most of the rules, regulations, and the overall system of agriculture, agricultural pricing, marketing, etc., was created in India in the 1960s and 70s. And according to most experts, many of those rules, regulations have outlived their utility entirely, and they need some fundamental reforms. As Professor Ghosh also argues, that much of the produce in India actually gets wasted because of a lack of various facilities and because of a lack of various market incentives. So, in this context, this Agrarian Reforms Act becomes very, very important. The fact is that agricultural reforms face its most serious protest from a region that has benefited most from the agrarian reforms that happened 40 to 50 years ago. So, in the present context, once again, I welcome Professor Ghosh and invite him to proceed with his lecture, and I welcome all members of the audience also. Professor Ghosh, please proceed.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Ravikant Mishra, the entire team of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, for giving me this opportunity to interact with you. We are all in a very strange, living in a strange world with COVID around us. That's the bad part, that we can't meet each other physically. But the good silver lining is that because of technological advancement and development, we are being able to interact. So the world is not stopping. So that's the good part. Thank you for the introduction and the generous, kind words about me. I am like anybody else. I am just a student of agriculture, because I don't think that anybody can ever be a master of agricultural systems or understanding the agricultural systems. Let me put a disclaimer: I don't have a background in agricultural sciences per se. I am an economist. I hope you don't mind. And so by training, I know that's not a compliment, but I have been I have been a bit adventurous in terms of trying to look at the society and organization of the society from an economic perspective, which is slightly unorthodox, and also have been very interested in looking at sectors which I think have very, very crucial and important role to play if for India in the 21st century. Primarily among that is rural and agricultural systems, including resource, environment. These are my broad areas of interest. And when you talk about development, obviously this is what would come to somebody like me in my mind on top of everything else. So I'm just an explorer, and I'm just going to share some of my views, what I have learned in my experiences here. In the last few years, I have been working in India. Before this, I was working in the European setting in Sweden and Germany for quite a few years. But I'm back to India, and I am originally, of course, of India. I studied, did everything, just went for my PhD, taught for a while, for 8-9 years, I was away. So I also have had the good luck and fortune of looking at international European markets, mostly as an academic. So I have been involved with some food waste projects in my tenure so far, primarily in the global food waste market. So if most of you probably know, as a rule of thumb, 30% of all the food which is produced globally. And I'm sorry, I don't have any PowerPoints, I don't have numbers, data to throw at you and make you really aware of things. But there are two reasons for that. One is I am not, I want to avoid data as much as possible because that comes in the way
That's
of
fine.
conversation. And it's better to have discuss more on the narratives. We economists have a fetish for data. I'm trying to do away with that. The second is I really didn't have the time to prepare some structured slides. So I'll just speak myself out and I'll invite you for a discussion and your comments, suggestions, and what I can learn from you. So coming back to the issue of food waste, 30% as a rule of thumb in the food is wasted globally. Now, there are two components of that. Usually we combine that. That is called FLW, which is food loss and waste. So if we look at developed, quote unquote, consumer markets in Europe and the US, most of the waste happens downstream, which is called as waste, which is consumer, post-consumption or consumer waste. Even at retail, whatever waste happens in store, rejections, all of that is counted as food waste. In developing, quote unquote, world, uh, most of the food is lost actually. So it's a food loss, and the food loss happens in the supply chain, starting from the production, the farm where it is produced. It's lost because of various, if the crop fails, it is lost if the harvest is not done properly. It is lost if it is not transported or stored after the harvest is done. It is lost if it is not, even if there is a transport and storage, but that is not up to a level, a standard which can ensure that the quality doesn't deteriorate, which means there is a quality deterioration. That is also counted as a loss. When it goes to the mandis, there is a lot. When it goes to up to the grocery stores via fresh fruits and vegetable push cart people, our grocery mandis, sabji mandis as we know them, all of that, there is huge waste. So that's, I think, one of the biggest. 30% of that, I mean, loss and waste combined, probably can feed 1/3 of the world. And 1/3, let's say, of the food produced never actually gets consumed. So that's a big problem. Now, coming back to our context of food loss, what is going on? What is one of the main reasons that food gets lost in our, now coming back to the Indian setup, is of course we have the logistical reasons, but one of the main reasons is because farmers often do not get the right price for it. So there are twisted incentives. Let us understand the agricultural sector a little bit in terms of a paradox, which I call. Our agricultural sector is actually kind of full of a lot of paradoxes. So, for example, one is a sugar paradox. So, which means we subsidize sugar production the most, right? But sugar is probably the most unhealthy commodity to consume. We love sugar, right? We don't want to pay high prices for that. At the same time, if farmers get high price for that, that transfers to consumers, we complain. But also when we consume a lot of sugar, that has ill effects on health, that has ill effect on the soil quality because it's extremely water intensive and it is grown in many regions where water is not very easily available. So irrigation productivity is very bad. So it has all in all negatives, mostly speaking. But at the same time, that is where most of our farmers are engaged. A lot of our farming population is engaged. How do you solve for these trade-offs? You go to a mandi as consumers. When are we happiest? We are happiest when we get our aloo tomato or whatever, or dal or rice, all our commodities, cereals or fresh fruit and vegetables at the cheapest possible prices. But how does it translate to the farmers? Very badly. So we are happy when actually prices are low as consumers, right? But the moment we think about the farmers, we have a psychological distance. So we can't really understand and imagine what is going on with them in terms of when the price is low. So there is a very twisted price transmission problem in Indian agricultural commodities, which means when prices actually get high on the consumer end, that does not necessarily get transmitted to the farmers in terms of farmers getting high prices. At the same time, when when actually prices crash, then farmers also get very less price. So this is called technically in economics as asymmetric price transmission. So it's not symmetric. When there is a price gain at the market, farmers are not making any gains. Let me put it simply. But when there is a loss, or when there's a fall in the consumer side, then farmers are actually making a loss. So it's an unfair price transmission. This leads to huge commodity losses across the supply chain. Now, why there is an asymmetric price transmission? What does it say? Why do you think if there is a price increase, I as a consumer am willing to pay 10-20% extra for, let's say, commodity I prefer. But for that 20% extra, the farmer doesn't get probably 2% extra, right? It is lost in the chain. Whereas if there is a fall in price, immediately the farmers have to bear the burden. It's very unfair. And there are a lot of studies in agricultural economics globally on Indian cases, on developing countries cases, which show that there is strong asymmetric price transmission. So why is there this chain so unfair? Right? I'm very unfamiliar with a one-way conversation, because the classrooms at IIM Ahmedabad are extremely interactive, which means by design these are case-based, and we just have to go around and take views. So I'm finding it a bit difficult for this monologue, but I'll try my best. But then I'll invite your comments once I'm done in maybe 15-20 minutes. So one of the main reasons why we have this asymmetric price transmission is because there is power in the intermediate stages. So the power actually rests not with the consumers. The power doesn't rest with the farmers. The power rests with intermediation. Now, in European markets, also many commodities have asymmetric price transmission. I have personally done studies on soybean, international global soybean markets, imports from Brazil to Europe, and I've seen there is asymmetric price transmission. But there, the asymmetricity or that unfairness, let's say in simple words, is coming from a very strong market power control of retailers. So what happens if you go to a European country, let's say you go to Germany, Sweden, UK, you have very few powerful retailers. They control the prices, right? So wherever price transmission is unfair, that's a reflection of a very distorted sector, a distorted structure. There is something fundamentally wrong. As an analyst, all what our studies are showing is that there's something wrong. Now, it's up to us individually in our different capacities as different types of, using analytical tools to find out what is actually going wrong. So in the European case, it's because power is concentrated in a very few retailers. In India, it is because power is concentrated with the traders, with the mandis in general, right? I'll show you a small example of that. I'll share a small PPT. I do this in my class, so it was not very difficult for me to dig this out. I'll just share my screen, and let's do that. Okay. So I don't know, how do I my entire screen? Okay. I'm very unfamiliar with.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. With Google Meet, more familiar with. Okay. So if you can see this is just a supply chain of tur dal in Karnataka. Just to give you a small example, a quick rundown of how the problem, we can see the same thing in a different perspective. So how is a chain? How is a value chain? Call it a supply chain. Call it, actually it's a value chain. Or let's say tur in Karnataka. A farmer produces tur dal. A commission agent come trader comes and collects it. Either from the warehouse, the farmer either goes to the warehouse in some cases, but most cases, trader and commission agent just comes and collects, aggregates at farmer level. goes to the miller. Just it's a simple caricature. The miller I can either gives it to the retail chain procurement, or the miller gives to the wholesaler. Then the wholesaler gives to the retailer and goes to the consumer. So let's say we take only this as a simple example: farmer to the commission agent, to the miller, to the wholesaler, to the retailer, and the customer. Right? What is going on here? This is a study done by Mikhala Krishnamurthy. I think she's at Shivnadar University currently. She did a very nice study of comparing agri APMC markets in states of Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, and Bihar. And she did a case study on tour. And this is a table I borrowed from her. So look at what is happening here. Look at the profit of the farmers. It's actually for cost per quintal of tur dal. The profit for a farmer, for a typical farmer in Karnataka, obviously this with different contexts, with different commodities, these figures will change. But it's a matter of saying in terms of an indicative, but a real world data, right? But at the end of it, just an indicative case. Is 1787. What is the profit of a processor? 1752. So the farmer's profit is in fact a little bit higher than the processor. The wholesaler's profit margin is 553. The retailer's margin is 490, right? So on the face of it, actually farmer is making very good profits, right? But this is not the way to see an agricultural commodity supply chain. Look at the cost. Sorry. Look at the cost of production of a farmer. Look at the investment of the farmer, 1936 rupees. What is the profit now? 1787. Look at the investment of a processor. What is the cost of a processor? 2016 plus 33 plus 3 plus 15, something around 300 or maybe even less than 300 is actually the cost. Or maybe if you include if you include 70, all of these are actually the cost. So maybe something close to 400 rupees. Now look at the proportional difference. For a 1936 rupees investment, a farmer is getting a return of 1787. A processor for a 400 odd approximately investment is getting a 1752 return, right? So what's the problem? Why are we complaining? The wholesaler on the same hand is making, let's say, incurring some cost of 300 odd plus a few small costs here and there, still making a margin. If you look at the share of value, farmer's profit, if you don't look at this, then you see it's approximately 39% of the profit across. But in reality, when you compare, the production, the chain costs, then actually of the entire supply chain costs, the farmer is incurring 66% of the entire cost, right? I'll just stop sharing here. So one has to look at the farmer's profit not in terms of the per unit profit of the wholesaler or the miller, but in terms of how much cost. So that is the first trick. In proportion to that, its profit is not very high. Maybe 5 times profit a wholesaler or a miller is making, farmer is making only maybe 100, just a notch higher than its investment cost or lower than its investment. What is the second trap? The second trap is this: that the cost sheet, the supply chain sheet we saw was for one farmer supplying to a wholesaler or a miller or a trader, whatever you want to say, right? The farmer gets that 1757 rupees, goes back and does farming, comes back next season to get that for one unit of land which he or she is investing. So that's only one farmer is only earning that. Now look at what the trader is doing. The trader is aggregating thousands of farmers. So in that same sheet, you multiply the profit, the margin of the trader 1,000 times. That is what a trader or a wholesaler is earning compared to the farmer, because farmer is only 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre, one time, one bag, 10 bags, 1 quintal, 10 quintal, whatever, gets that profit, comes back, Done. The wholesaler is aggregating. The trader is aggregating thousands of quintals. So there is no comparison. This is why we see that asymmetric price transmission. Right? This is where the power is concentrated. It's very fundamental to understand that. Now the question is why, right? Why do you think our farmers, face this asymmetric, price situation, unfair pricing? Why does, farmer have to go back and be satisfied with this one small, one-time, one-time margin? Is because our farmers are extremely small. They have 1.5, 2 acres, 2.5 acres, 1.5 hectares, or what something is 1.75 hectares is an average farm size of an Indian farm. So one time produce is what a 2 hectare or 3 acre farm can produce. Now compare this with the average farm size of, let's say, an American farmer. I know we shouldn't compare America, India, Europe, but nonetheless, these are realities, structural realities. Right? And this is not a subjective comparison, but this is a factual comparison. What is the average size of an American farmer? 500 plus hectares. One farmer. You remove the tail because there are a lot of tail farmers in Midwest kind of zones. So if you look at the bulk and if you remove the tail, then your medium farmer would be something like 1,200, 1,300 hectares. You can even find farms in Iowa, in Midwest America, which are 3,000, 4,000 hectares. Now that one farmer has equal power balance with the trader. Our Indian farmer doesn't have that equal bargaining power. Let's try to understand this. This is absolutely fundamental to understanding this is the root of all the structural issues we see in our agricultural markets. Okay. Now this is something very important to understand, that this is where the roots have. Farmers essentially have very low bargaining power. Right? On top of the structural constraints of actually having very low farm size, less farm size, what are the other structural problems they have had traditionally? Farmers should not be even allowed to sell where they want. So if I'm a small, let's say, whatever, groundnut farmer or some small farmer of, let's say, very specialty variety of rice in let's say Bihar. Okay, I come from Bihar. So we have a very special variety there in my region where I come from called Katarni rice. I don't know how many of you have heard it. So farmers have now if I value Katarni rice sitting here in Gujarat, or you value sitting there in Delhi, or some of you are attending from US or Europe, you value, and you are willing to pay a premium for that. I, as a Bihar farmer, in Bihar, APMCs have been abolished long time back. But assuming a standard, farmer in India, typically in other states where there would be mandi laws would be applicable, would not be even allowed to sell to a buyer who is outside the mandis. Now, this is an additional, this actually beats any logic as to why a farmer. This is probably the only sector in industry. Imagine you're a producer of automobiles, you're a producer of, I don't know what, mobile phones, you're a producer of anything, cups, jars. If somebody comes and tells you, no, you are a producer of automobiles, you can only sell in Haryana because you produce it in Manesar. The hell will break loose. But when it comes to agricultural produce, no, it only mandated to sell to mandis. Right? Traditionally, this was a problem. So any sensible thinking person, in my opinion, would not find any logic to this, but still it existed. Why? Because there is a history to it. There is history to everything. There is history to land tenancy laws. There is history to the Essential Commodities Act. There is history to also the fact that there were mandis, because there was a time when these institutions were created to protect farmers because of the realities and the context and the structural issues at that time. Right? But with developed markets, with transport, with roads, with connected a much more connected world where the structural constraints have changed, abilities of the farmers to produce, everything has actually evolved to a great extent. They don't seem to be relevant or meaningful, or at least not fair, in my opinion. So that is another constraint which was there with farmers. Okay. With this kind of a structure, asymmetric price transmission, structurally small land, inability to sell anywhere at your own free will, how do we expect our farmers to be competitive either globally or competitive either even for premium markets within the state? So India is one of the largest producers of apple. India is one of the largest producers of bananas, probably the largest producer of mangoes. But we are nowhere globally competitive in these sectors. Right? So these are some of the structural constraints which prevent us. How do we become competitive? What is the core offering to be competitive in any premium market, whether it's global or national? Is assurance of quality. Agricultural markets work on quality discovery, price discovery. Even if you go to a mandi, if you go to an agricultural mandi, in a very traditional normal mandi, how prices are set and determined. You take wheat or rice in a mutti, you smell, you taste, you decide what is the value of that quality, and then you put a price to that. Price is linked to quality. The moment farmers cannot offer or deliver on quality, there is no competitiveness. So I'll just show us again a small video, and that's why I said I tried playing that just to give a comparison of one commodity we'll take bananas. And we all complain why. I mean, we have some of the best tasting bananas in the world. Conditions extremely favorable for good produce and crop. But no, we are not there yet. Nowhere. We hardly any presence in export. I'll just show you one small video to see how actually international banana markets operate. So let me again share my screen. And I hope it works. And let's go bananas or bananas.
Official. Bananas are the most popular fruit in the UK, and we scoffed almost one.
So can you hear and see?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Where did it go? Oh,
it's not working.
Okay, now.
Billion of them last year. But unlike apples or pears, we import our bananas from far-off places. Here in Costa Rica, this plantation is the size of 324 football pitches. The workers use a pulley system to get themselves around. It's meant to transport the fruit, but catching a lift saves them from walking. Modern bananas are sterile, so each new plant must be taken from an old cutting. This is pretty tough work, as the plants can grow several meters tall. If the workers didn't replant each year, the plantation would stop producing. Once the fruit begins to emerge, the plants must be pruned. The large purple flowers at the base divert energy that would produce bigger, tastier bananas, so the workers remove it. The remaining bunches are put into bags coated with insecticides to protect them from being eaten. To keep the insects at bay, the crops are also sprayed, but not by an aeroplane. They use a high-tech chopper, which is more agile. It's controlled by satellite technology, which stops local workers being covered with pesticides in their own homes. These bananas have a radius of 3 centimeters, and although they're not ripe yet, now is the perfect time to collect them. When the fruit has reached this ideal size, these guys have the job of preparing them for the packing plant. Their protective bags are removed, and foam inserts are placed between the bunches. If the fruit have even the tiniest bruises, UK customers leave them on the shelf, so they're protected right from the start. Enormous bunches are loaded onto the pulley system and join a long traffic jam of other fruit heading for the processing plant. Now, you'd need an enormous trolley to buy a bunch of 60 bananas with your weekly shopping, so now they're separated into smaller ones before being sent for a bath. Tough EU laws legislate for bananas' size, shape, and even their curve, so the workers must be sure there are no slip-ups with any fruit that aren't up to scratch. Any that fail are thrown onto the waste conveyor, but they aren't discarded. They'll be used to feed local livestock or sent to be processed into baby food. The remaining bananas are then sent off for another bath, which kills off any spiders who may be trying to hitch a ride to a supermarket near you. The fruit is given its trademark branding, and boxes are built to store them for their long journey across the Atlantic. This plantation has produced over 270,000 boxes of bananas. They're packed up and sent by the lorry load to the docks. Here, they're put on board ships in specially cooled containers for the journey to Europe. They won't be enjoying any sun on the deck, though. It's an 11-day journey, and being in the sun would ripen them too early. When they're finally unloaded, the bananas are still green. This means they can be stored until the shops need them. They're stacked in sealed ripening rooms. When the stores need them, these rooms will be flooded with ethylene gas. This gas ripens the bananas at a regular, measurable pace, which means the stores know exactly when they are ready for the shelves. So, from the exotic fields of a Costa Rican plantation to the supermarket trolley in the UK, the Brits are certainly bananas about their bananas.
Okay, so just to give you, a sense of what actually is required to deliver quality downstream. So what is the problem here in terms of what we see, in terms of the global developed value chains and our value chains? Is the global value chains are consumer driven, which means the price transmission is fair compared to a producer driven value chain where the price transmission is asymmetric, which means a value chain basically concept means that you first determine what is the end product, what is the end demand, and then you design your activities across the chain to the farm level to decide, and this is what we do, right? If you're producing automobiles, you first determine what your consumer would like, and then you go back to your floor assembly line and decide what exactly are the components required. So that's simply a value chain concept. So agri-food sector has moved globally to a value chain model, where it's the value, what the consumer is seeking, what the producer, primary producer, farmer is seeking, is actually striving to deliver. So once you know what your bananas, who is a consumer market, what bananas you need to come up with, if you're talking about bananas, then you know what is required in terms of the seeds, in terms of the farm practice, in terms of the harvesting technology, in terms of the transport, in terms of everything in the chain. Right? Across the supply and the value chain, you need high level of monitoring. Right? And high level of monitoring means at each and every node, agreements have to be enforced, have to be looked at, have to work. Otherwise, this model will not work. So this is what this is how actually value can be created in an agri-food, chain. If, the farmer is actually connected to the end market, to the end consumer. The farmer knows, the farmer sitting in Costa Rica, in that whatever huge farming land, whoever owns that or a set of farmers, know exactly what bananas will sell in UK, and they produce the same quality and deliver, and therefore they get the value, they get a higher share of that. What happens in traditional value chains is just the opposite. We produce, in our context, we just produce whatever comes off, whatever survives the vagaries of weather and production and harvesting and transport, reaches the market, and that is ultimately sold. And whatever price you get in a distress kind of a situation, whoever is powerful, the trader, the wholesaler, the retailer, whoever is more powerful, just offers whatever they want to offer, and the farmer just picks that, goes back to the farm and does its own, goes back to its own specialization. This is what actually differentiates. Now, when I say that 21st century agri-food markets or in a sector will develop only when we have fairness in the entire value chain, and that fairness will happen when our farmers are facilitated to come close to the consumers as much as possible by bringing processing, by bringing grading, sorting, by bringing all value-added activities close to the farmer and not close to the retailer, not close to the wholesaler, not farther away from the farmer. The more it is farther away from the farmer, the more number of players there are within, between the primary producer and the consumer, the farmer will continue to be at a big loss. Okay. But we cannot compare ourselves with Costa Rica. We cannot compare ourselves with India. And this is my last point, and I'll sign off after that. We cannot compare ourselves, because our farmers have small and marginal. So how do you do that? So you don't aggregate at the production level, you aggregate at the produce level. You aggregate so if 1,000 farmers come together, form either a cooperative which has not been working except for, let's say, sugar, but now in the modern parlance, it's farmer producer companies which are being actually promoted. So if a lot of farmers come together, form their own companies, aggregate their produce, they get immediately a very high bargaining power with the retailers, with the actors in the supply chain. Whereas a single farmer will never have that bargaining power. So what requires is institutions which facilitate aggregation, farmer producer companies, who can negotiate and bargain for processing facilities, for all value-added activities. And that is the way, I think our sector will actually advance and move forward. And to that extent, I think the reforms which have taken place, and this is a point I want to touch upon before I go off, is just ensuring, in my opinion, in my analysis, a level playing field. So if there are banana producers in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, and there are consumers who are willing to pay very high price for, they're willing to pay a premium for that sitting somewhere, let's say in Gujarat or somewhere sitting in Canada, then the farmers, as collectives, as companies, in whatever manner possible, are absolutely should be well within their rights to be able to sell directly to whomever they want. This is, if there is even an argument about this, I think there is something seriously wrong in terms of, where we want to see our, our primary producers, who are basically our annadatas. So I think, to that extent, these are level playing field. And I think I wrote somewhere that this is almost, bringing reforms, ensuring level playing field doesn't really mean anything in real terms. It's just it's an environment, but ultimately it is how individual actors come in and make use of this environment to facilitate a good agri-food, strong agri-food sector where farmers have get real share, high share of the value. So I say now cricket match is going on here in Ahmedabad. So if there is a game going on in Motera in Ahmedabad, all what the Gujarat Cricket Association can do is to ensure that there are good pitch conditions which are slightly favorable to the Indian players, and the rules are not compromised, umpires are qualified, boundaries are determined, lighting is proper, the balls visible, all of that. It can only ensure a level playing field for both England cricket team and Indian cricket team. Of course, there will be a slight, purposeful bend to help domestic players, right? So that is what we are trying to aim here, is to help facilitate an environment where farmers can actually come together, can actually, try to gain equal bargaining power and get a stake directly. But that does not mean that India will win simply because the match is going to happen in Ahmedabad, in whatever. It will still depend on how the Indian team performs on that particular day. Or if the England team performs, they win. The Indian team performs that way. This is not an assurance. And environment is not an assurance. It is how does the Gujarat agriculture sector or a Bihar agriculture sector or a Tamil Nadu agriculture sector, how does NAFED react to this? How does Reliance procurement react to this? We all know of ITC Chopal has been an excellent and a successful model for quite a long time, where farmers, they have been able to increase the farmers' share and value. I hope there's no time to go into that, but for those who have not heard of ITC Chopal, I request that you go and read and see how ITC Chopal has been working. It's that. It's how individual actors can really come and have a skin in the game in terms of involving farmers to an extent where there is a value chain integration, and that is where the real performance will lie. These are the modern reforms are, I think, very good fair play conditions. Okay, I talked beyond my brief. Thank you very much, and maybe a quick 5 to 10 minutes of if any questions or comments or suggestions. More than questions, I would like to hear from all of you your views, because these are just my limited perspective.
Thank you very much, Professor Ranjan. It was indeed very, very comprehensive and very enlightening lecture on this very important subject. And as you rightly concluded, in my opinion, the fact is that reforms are much needed in agriculture, and they are actually in the interest, of the farmer in a variety of ways. But obviously, this is something that needs to be communicated. As you have pointed out in your lecture, some of the problems of Indian agriculture are fundamental. For example, the small size of land holding. To my mind, that is probably the biggest problem that the Indian farmer faces compared to farmers in most parts of the world, I will say, and especially in the developed countries. Our farms are extremely small. In fact, 2/3 of our land holdings fall in the category of small and marginal, and 15 to 20 in the category of medium. And I think that only about 5% or maybe even less of the land holdings fall in the category of large land holdings. And there is a further disparity here in the distribution of large holdings. The large holdings are generally found in certain parts of the country. You can take Punjab, Haryana as a typical region. And of course, there are smaller pockets within each state where you typically find large scale holdings. But generally speaking, we can say that most of the land holdings in India are simply uneconomical, if we can put it that way. Meaning that you cannot probably practice agriculture on those small farms in a remunerative manner. So that is a given factor. Of course, there are historical reasons behind it. First, of course, is that our population has grown by 4 times since independence. And then, of course, we did not have any law of primogeniture or anything of that sort. So land is divided and distributed every generation. So naturally it will happen, and land is limited, as they say. So with each passing generation, the size of land holding will become smaller. Of course, there is a mechanism in the sense that farmers do leave the villages, and they eventually sell their lands, and they sort of become urban dwellers. But the fact is that this has been an extremely slow process in India in compared to many parts of the world, which means that the percentage of people or percentage of Indian population engaged in agriculture is still way too high. I think at least 50 to 55% people have agriculture as their main source of income. And with a small farm of 2 3 acres, obviously you cannot earn a decent living. So these are, of course, structural and long-term problems, and I don't think that there is any short-term solution either, with experts or with the government. However, there are things, as you have pointed out, which can be done by the governments on the basis of the expert advice given by economists, people specializing in various aspects of agriculture, and various other people. And as you rightly said, in my opinion, one of the most important things that needs to be done basically is to establish a proper relationship between input versus profits. I think that's the heart of the problem of Indian agriculture. Agriculture, by its very region, by its very nature, especially in a tropical country, predominantly tropical country like India, and given all those other conditions, is a very fragile kind of occupation, I will say. Very uncertain. In some years, a farmer may suddenly, in fact, earn a huge profit. As we know, the Indian literature is full of it. And in many years, he may simply go into losses. And in fact, there is a paradox involved there. Yeah, so far as I know, but you can enlighten me better on this subject. And the paradox is this, that the produce or the output in any given year needs to be at an optimal level in order for the farmer to get the maximum price. If the produce is too little, it might lead to hoarding, and the traders and middlemen might make all the profits. But on the other hand, if there is a bumper crop, then obviously the prices will fall, and the asymmetric price transmission, as you say, will obviously ensure that the farmer gets a very small part of, farmer gets the overwhelming share of that fall in prices. On the other hand, whenever there is a rise in prices, the farmer gets only a very small part of it. So these are unfair practices, as I would say, which need to be removed from agriculture. And they were originally created, as you rightly said. In fact, I can go back further, not just 1960s and 70s, and I can argue that actually they originated in the colonial context, because agriculture during the colonial period had become so backward in India that our national movement, our freedom struggle, actually, had agricultural reforms at its heart, because the plight of the farmer, the plight of the peasant who was exploited by everybody, by the zamindar, by the revenue collector, by the small officials, by the state as a whole, by all kinds of intermediaries, actually was a principal concern for all our freedom fighters. So quite naturally, we wanted to, do away with the regressive practices which were holding agriculture back. And it was actually, in the 1960s and 70s, we did not have the kind of connectivity between different parts of the country, and therefore it made sense that you will organize local markets, and the farmer had that ability to go to that local market and sell his things. And of course, the local populace also will be benefited, in the sense that there will be no artificial shortage in the locality, because it was difficult to carry food grains, especially from one region to another, in times of distress. In fact, historically, this has been the most important reason behind famines, because in the condition of famines till the 19th century, what happened was that, suppose the area of the famine was small, say it had a radius of 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, then obviously food grains could be supplied from outside and famine could be taken care of. But whenever historically the area of a famine was sufficiently large, say the radius was 500 kilometers, what would happen? How will you carry food grains? Because the principal mode of carrying food grains to an area was actually pack animals, and pack animals also had to be fed while they were carrying food grains. So what would happen is that when you try to supply food grains from outside, a very large proportion of it will have to be fed to the very animals that are actually carrying it. And this happened historically, I think, especially in India. So it was very difficult to take care of the supply chain, as I would say, whenever the area affected by a famine was large. So I think the solutions that were found in organizing local markets everywhere to enable the farmer to sell his produce at a very convenient place, in order to enable him and also the consumer actually to benefit him, from it were rooted in our history, were rooted in our past, and they played their role. However, the fact is very clear that now they have outlived their utility. In fact, they outlived their utility probably a few decades ago. So these reforms are long overdue, and they are actually in so many ways in the interest of the farmers. But of course, there are many complexities involved there, because of which it is difficult to sort of establish this. And and this is more like a comment that I have been making. The other thing that you have said, this how to sort of aggregate at the level of produce. I would say that this is a very important point that you have made, because Indian conditions actually do not permit aggregation at the level of producers. Because one, producers are very, very small, they are not organized, they do not have the bargaining power vis-a-vis the traders. And let me say this, that this has always been the case. It was always the middlemen who had the capital. And I can tell you, in the Indian context, even the large farmers generally lack the capital, generally lack the bargaining power vis-a-vis the middlemen, not just small farmers. So the fact is that this is a very important point that you make, that we need aggregation at the level of produce, and we need proper supply chains which ensure proper value addition, so that the farmer knows what kind of market he is producing for, and what kind of price he can expect. Because the problem, as you rightly said at the very beginning, is that the input cost of the farmer is extremely high in proportion to the profit that he might earn, which means that it is the farmer who is taking all the risk. And obviously, you see, the beneficiary is mainly the middleman, the trader. The consumer generally does not get any benefit from it, because whenever the prices crash, you see that only a small part of that crash is actually passed on to the consumer. But on the other hand, whenever the prices rise, a very, very large proportion of it is passed on to the consumer. So quite clearly, it is the middlemen who are the culprits. Of course, in this whole thing, I'm not saying that that's the only factor. Of course, we need, as you said right at the beginning, that 30% of our produce, and maybe even more, by some accounts, probably 40%, especially the fragile agricultural, perishable agricultural commodities like fruits and vegetables, are actually wasted at the level of production and distribution, not at the level of consumer, which is what happens in the developed countries. So we obviously need to take care of it, and if we can contribute to the prosperity of the farmer, and also bring the prices down for the consumer, which does not happen as of now. And the other factor, I think, I wish that you spoke a little bit on how sugarcane is produced in regions where it should not be produced. So in a perverse sort of manner, sugar is subsidized when it is otherwise such a harmful commodity in so many ways. And the reason is precisely this agricultural system that was put in place in the 1960s and 70s, in an era of scarcity, when we needed to ensure food stability in the country. We had the bad experience of drought years, PL 480, etc., etc. Now we see that, as you rightly said, in Punjab and Haryana, in many parts, in the last 40-50 years, environment and ecosystem has been damaged severely because of the production of crops that were not naturally suited for this region. The Punjab and Haryana normally receive, if I remember it correctly, less than 100 centimeters of rainfall in a year. So in that kind of a region, producing sugarcane, or I would say most varieties of rice, is a totally, in the environmental sense, it is a disastrous kind of thing to do. And yet, because of these perverse subsidies, this thing has been done for such a long time. And obviously, it is very important now to gradually do away with some of this, in order to sort of take care of these distortions in input costs, and the distortions in price mechanism. So there is a lot, obviously, that needs to be done. And as you rightly said, obviously everything cannot be done in one stroke, but certainly if we go ahead with some of these things, it will make a big difference, and it seems to be ultimately in the interest of the farmers. Would you like to respond to it?
No, except that my whatever I spoke was worth it, because it could actually elicit such a wonderful response, such a crisp, nice summary. I wish I could I could have spoken half as nicely as you did. So I'm really very happy and thankful for the way you summarize. And also
I'm
like,
really very
thank you very
thankful.
much.
Any questions and comments
Yes,
from
any
other
questions and
participants?
comments? Yeah. To Dr. Ravi Mishra.
No, no, no.
Okay, well, we'll take it
Yes,
together.
Professor Surajuddin, please go ahead. Yes. Yes, go ahead, Professor Sirajuddin. We can't hear you. What is the problem? We can't.
So there's a network issue.
Question or comment from anybody? This is such a topical issue. I think you have delivered such a wonderful lecture that everybody is totally convinced.
No,
So,
I think on the contrary,
yeah.
I probably didn't make half as much sense as I should have. But I think this is a very important and interesting topic, and
You see, yeah.
I'm very very thankful to all the participants and the organizers.
And
Please feel free if you'd like to have some more discussion. I would love to learn from your experiences, and if I could somehow share. So I have a lot of good case material because in IIM Ahmedabad we teach a lot of cases. So very nice cases in terms of apples, commodities. For example, we have Mir Khurram, who was with HN AgriServe, has done amazing value chain development for apples in from Kashmir. Then case of Reliance, how it created a social value chain in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Then we of course have IITC e-Chopal, a wonderful model. If that gets replicated, probably our agri-business markets will just flourish. And a very interesting case of Wincreens by Anju Srivastava, who is been a very first generation agri-business entrepreneur who has been able to develop very good rental and market models involving farmers, bringing them to the value chain. So there's a lot of interesting thing happening. Is that we should not underestimate our farmers. We should, as I say, just make them important stakeholders in the process. But that will require, as I say, investment from the side of.
Can I ask?
Let's say bulk buyers, whoever they are public. Yes.
yes, please
Yes.
go ahead.
Please. And who is this?
Yes, if I am allowed to speak
Yes, please go ahead.
and give my.
We can't hear you.
Yeah. You see, it's a nice presentation. You have covered.
It's unfortunate because the network.
It's not working out.
Yeah.
There was one last question. The earlier one was more of a comment, and I'm so happy that you liked it. Now, one question that occurs to me is, as you said, you come from Bihar, and there the APMC Act was actually abolished long ago. I think some 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And the resistance to agricultural reforms in most parts of the country is very, very lukewarm. It's very, very muted. And it is only in northwestern India where actually the farmers are best placed in terms of the fact that the land holdings are generally much larger. The typical land holding in Punjab and Haryana is probably 8 to 10 acres, if I remember these facts correctly. And of course, you see that this was the region where Green Revolution flourished. So why is it that despite having all the strength, the farmers of this region are most opposed to reforms in agriculture? Do you think that it's simply because, there is a communication problem there? Or do you think that there are, other reasons that, it is the farmers in this region who are most concerned about agricultural reforms?
Well, to be honest, I am not very sure about this because I have not been, I have not have any direct interaction. I have not visited the site. I have not seen what is going on. Whatever we get to know is from media, which I always take with a pinch of salt. So I don't know what is really the motivation behind this. There's such long-standing protests. But if for whatever is the worth of the seriousness of that, which I'm sure there must be some merit, and we need to understand that a bit more. But maybe something to do with not actually understanding in its entirety what these changes, institutional reforms or changes mean. So there has been a lot of discussion about a fear that MSPs will be taken away. As far as I see and understand, there is no mention of any thing related to the removal of minimum support prices. Now these states are very much dependent on minimum support prices. I would say 70 to 80% of procurement on MSP happens in these states. So maybe that is one apprehension which has probably fueled this. But I don't see any discussion or any thing coming close to saying the reforms or in the changes which are proposed, which has anything to do with the minimum support floor prices. At the end of the day, these floor prices are, as I say, like you have the safety net in a circus, right? So you have acrobats in a circus who are actually doing all that the acrobatics there. That is a real game. What is there below the rope is a safety net. In case somebody slips, you fall, you don't hurt yourself. At the end of the day, minimum support prices are safety nets. They cannot become walking sticks. They should not become walking sticks, right? That should not become the gold standard. That is, if you really, if for some reason it is again to prevent some kind of an unfairness in the market. So for some reason, markets do not, compensate you for the value you have a safety net. But the real action is in the value chain. The real action is how much value you're creating out of a commodity, and you're being able to, touch the premium markets. But somehow, this becomes endogenous, and you tend to see minimum support prices or the floor prices as an entitlement, which I don't think is very good for overall development of market.
And it especially becomes Professor Ghosh, it becomes especially a problem because of the fact that MSP is applicable only to a set of commodities, and that also prevents in a way diversification in agriculture, because once the farmers have this kind of a distorted incentive mechanism, obviously they focus on producing certain especially the cereals, on which they get
So look at Madhya Pradesh. I mean that most of the regions of Madhya Pradesh are not suited for growing wheat, but Madhya Pradesh is one of the biggest wheat belts of the country. The irrigation productivity, which means per unit irrigation you do, what is the productivity you're getting out of it? A simple metric of water use efficiency is the lowest in Madhya Pradesh for these kind of crops. In several other northern states, which are not suited. So as a result, groundwaters have dipped very, very strongly in these places because you grow these cereals simply because you get good prices. Groundwater dips, soil quality degrades, and there is long-term land degradation, soil degradation, where farmers are now really struggling to figure out what's going on because the water tables are gone, soil quality is degraded. Now they don't know what to do with it. So this is again a very serious resource, long-term resource problem. So the MSPs sometimes distort the markets, but as I said, you can't blame the MSPs. They are just a safety net, right? It is because we don't have the developed value chains. We don't have especially the global value chains are not evolved and developed as we have, because we don't have our farmers really connected to the target consumers, whether it's national or global, is why we see our reliance on safety nets. Just imagine you go to a circus and you see our acrobats are lying down and jumping on the on the rope. Well, that's not what the real game is all about.
very interesting. Professor Sirajuddin, you can try once again if you can connect.
I will have to go away in for at the max.
Yeah, that's okay. Professor Sirajuddin, please try once again to ask your question. I think there is some problem. So in any case, I think now then, we will conclude right away. And, I'm really, really thankful to you, Professor Ghosh, for joining us this afternoon for this very interesting and topical lecture on this important subject. And it was a delightful experience for me, and I'm sure for all other participants also. And we hope to, have you again maybe sometime soon, on some similar subject, joining Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. So thank you very much. And the
So
lecture is recorded and available on YouTube.
okay, I feel flattered. I know that this is probably not close to the truth, but